think we was the black slaves from Africa when we was the actual slave master from Great Britain who was sending white people to America as the prisoners. The black judges were sending them. And then we wonder why white people love to lock us up. And they love to just have so much fun with us and kill us and shoot us. We don't know why. The Piracy Act of 1717, sometimes called the Transportation Act of 1717, was an act of the Parliament of Great Britain that established a regulated bonded system to transport criminals to colonies in North America for indentured service as a punishment for those convicted or attainted in Great Britain, excluding Scotland. The act established a 7-year transportation sentence as a punishment for people convicted of lesser felonies, those under the benefit of clergy, and a 14-year sentence for more serious crimes in lieu of capital punishment. It's time to find out why so-called white people have so much fun locking black people up. And what makes me say that they have so much fun doing it? Well, there's more so-called black people locked up in America than there are of any other group of people in the entire world combined. I mean, you gotta let that sink in for a second. There's more black people locked up in the world today, in America today, than there are the rest of the people in the whole world combined. So, in here, we're locked up at higher percentages than any other group of people. So it begs the question, what's the deal? Why is it? And most people say, oh, well, it's because of white supremacy. And that's true. It's because of racism. And that's true. But it's so much deeper than just those things. And we don't really understand the root cause of any of this. And we really don't understand why they just, why this? Why they just like to lock us up so bad, right? We were supposed to be their slaves, right? Couldn't they have been just happy keeping us as slaves, right? Even though that's just a complete lie. I'm not about to get into that right now because the topic this time is it's time to find out why so-called white people just have so much fun locking up black people, okay? And it's time for so-called white people to come clean. There's a group of white people who are white supremacists, right? Who have been playing Survivor, like the game show on reality show. They've been playing Survivor with so-called black people without black people really knowing that they're playing Survivor against them. They don't even know that they're playing. And there's a reason behind that. And so we're going to start getting into these reasons to see what it really is and what the real reason is behind them just wanting to constantly shoot us, have their police shoot us, put us in jail. We're about to get into it. So the first thing that we're going to get into is what's called a borough, right? We're gonna learn what boroughs are. We're gonna learn what hulks are, like the Incredible Hulk, right? The Hulk. We're gonna learn what hulks are. We're gonna learn what compters are. Almost sounds like Compton. We're gonna learn what houses of correction are. We're gonna learn what Liberty Gals and Town Gals are. And as we learn what these things are, it's going to become more and more apparent as we go throughout this, the real reason why so-called white people just love to put us in jail. It's gonna start becoming real clear. So we'll start it out with the actual definitions of what these things are. In other words, the definitions of the boroughs, the hulks, the compters, the houses of corrections. the Liberty Gals and the Town Gals. And when I say gal, it sounds like jail, but it's a gal. It's spelled Gaol. What exactly are these things that we're talking about? So if we go to a site that sometimes it goes down, sometimes it's not. It's a great site as far as talking about the history, institutionalized history, prison history. And it says under the section of boroughs, bridewells, compters, houses of corrections, liberty gals, and town gals, it says, aside from major city and county prisons, each town also would have a structure for handling rule breakers. The naming of these prisons is representative of the period in which they were first built or reflect some aspect of their design. So the first one is the borough prison. Now, we've heard of boroughs before, but I don't think many people have heard of a borough prison. Okay? But if you live in New York or have ever been to New York or heard anything about New York, you might understand that New York has boroughs. Queens is a borough. Brooklyn is a borough. Staten Island, Manhattan. These are all boroughs, right? But what we don't know is why they're called boroughs. And we don't know what boroughs really are. So we're about to find out what they are. Borough prisons were typically larger than town prisons and drew inmates from a number of different locales. Okay? So Queens used to be a prison. Okay? Brooklyn was a prison. Okay? Manhattan was a prison. The Bronx is a prison. That's what boroughs are. And there's not just boroughs in New York. There's boroughs also in England. And there's other boroughs. But the word borough is a giant prison. Okay? Now, what's a bridewell? Some people know what bridewell are. Bridewells were named after a prison created in 1553 at St. Bridewell's in London, formerly a palace of Henry VIII. Over time, the name was shortened to Bridewell and came to refer to gals of any size. So a gal is a jail or a prison. Okay? Now, what's a compter? Compters are defined as prisons usually attached to city courts whose inmates mainly consist of debtors. The term is typically used for prisons in London. However, there is at least one instance of a compter in Reading. Houses of correction. Houses of correction were created after the 1601 Elizabethan Poor Laws, criminalizing begging and vagrancy, and establishing structures where they would be forced to work. By the 18th century, they were also used to house pretrial and inmates. Okay, so a house of correction, see, back with the people in the Elizabethan era, they didn't, with Queen Elizabeth, the original Queen Elizabeth, Stuart, she was the one who started sending so-called white people to America. And she wasn't just sending any type of people to America. She was sending criminals to America, and she was sending homeless people to America. So we just heard about the 1601, the Elizabethan Poor Laws. So if you were poor, it was okay if you were poor. But if you were poor, what you had to do is you couldn't just beg for money. If you were poor, you had to have a license to beg for money. And the only way you were allowed to get a license to beg for money was you had to prove you was disabled. If you wasn't disabled and you could work, like you was a able-bodied working of your body worked and you could go work, oh, you had to go work. It wasn't no, I'm gonna just sit around and drink and beg, and that wasn't allowed. They would have what's called spirits, and a spirit would come and kidnap you. And after they kidnapped you, they would take you to a house of correction. And the house of correction was the place where you cleaned yourself up, you stopped drinking, and you went to work. And they fed you and they housed you. And you went through an apprenticeship so you could learn how to master a trade. And after you mastered that trade, then you could go out there and make yourself some money. So you weren't allowed to just go out here and beg. That wasn't allowed. Okay. So they made houses of corrections, and the houses of corrections are where the people would go. Okay. Now what they ended up doing after 1580 was they started sending the people to America, and Queen Elizabeth is the one who started. Because before, if you got caught being a criminal, you were probably just gonna get hung. They were just, that was the death penalty was the thing back then. If you got caught committing a crime, depending on the severity of the crime, they were just gonna lynch you. That's what they did. And so Queen Elizabeth was persuaded into having compassion over the vagrants, the prostitutes, the homeless people, the petty criminals, to the point where she said, okay, we're not going to kill them anymore. What we're going to do is, a man named Richard Hakluyt is the one who talked her into this. He said, look, we can use all these people that are just getting lynched and getting killed. We can use them to work. And so instead of lynching them, let's put them to work. We'll put all the homeless people to work, and we're going to send them over to the West Indies. And the West Indies is the name that they used to call America back in the day. So we're going to send them to America, and they're going to work. If they committed a petty crime, they got to work for 7 years. If they committed a major crime, they got to work for 14 years. And that was the punishment. It was called transportation. Transportation was the punishment for a crime. So this is what opened up the criminals who started coming to America, because we all think that people coming to America was these settlers and adventurers and these, that's not who was coming to America. The people who were coming to America were coming over to work in the colonies, and the colonies were set up as prisons. And how do we know that? Because the boroughs that they went to, the name, the word borough means prison. That's the name of, it's an entire giant prison. And they were sending so many of the prisoners over here from England to work in the factories, to work on the plantations. They would send them over here as workers, just the same way they do in prisons today. There's no difference. People got this idea when you go to prison, you just sit around all day and fight and smoke cigarettes and work out, but that's not what they do. When they go to prison, they get a job, right? There's a ton of stuff that you would never know is built by prison labor. There's a ton of things that you go shopping for that you have no idea was built by prison labor. It's not just license plates. Prisoners make a ton of things. They do a ton of jobs that nobody wants to do. This is what they do. And they get paid very little money. And there's no difference from them doing the work that they do today from the work that they used to do back in the 1600s. The only difference is now they haven't criminalized certain things. So being homeless is no longer a crime. And it wasn't a crime then. It's just you couldn't get caught begging. If you got caught begging, then one of the spirits was going to come and kidnap you, take you to court, testify that they caught you begging, and the judge was going to sentence you to transportation, where you had to learn a trade. And the way you were going to learn that trade was you was getting shipped to America to learn a trade. Sometimes you wouldn't get shipped to America. Sometimes you would just stay right there in England. But this is where the people who were coming to America, this is how they were coming, as prisoners. And they would leave England and they would sail their way down the coast all the way up and across the ocean into America. Now, Liberty Gals were so called because the area in which the prison was held had the liberty of its use. Okay, so it's not like some freedom jail. Okay, understand what this says. Liberty Gals were so called because the area in which the prison was held had the liberty of its use. This became contracted and was used invariably around the country, from Richmond to Peterborough to Ripon to St. Albans. And then town gals, as the name suggests, existed for the use of towns. Unlike some of the major prisons, due to their relatively small size, these would often be built within the town proper rather than on the outskirts where more space would be needed. And then it goes through a long list of borough prisons, Bridewells, Compters, houses of corrections. Okay. Now, another thing that we need to look up is there's one other kind of prison that we haven't talked about yet, which is called a hulk, like the Hulk. Okay, there's an actual prison that's called the Hulk. Okay, and what is a hulk? A hulk is a prison ship. And we'll look at this definition right here. A prison ship, often more accurately described as a prison hulk, is a current or former seagoing vessel that has been modified to become a place of substantive detention for convicts, prisoners of war, or civilian internees. While many nations have deployed prison ships over time, the practice was most widespread in the 18th and 19th century Britain, as the government sought to address the issue of overcrowded civilian jails on land and an influx of enemy detainees from the War of Jenkins' Ear, the 7 Years' War, and the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic War. Okay, so they're telling you here that they were in England, and this is true. They were in England. See, they come from England, right? But see, England used to own America, right? So when they say England, they're also talking about England right here in America, because America was England up until supposedly 1776, according to the story that we're all taught. Okay, so for that reason, we'll see all kinds of hulks that are right here in America. Okay, now they like to say that the hulks in America were used for were all from the Revolutionary War. That's where they put the prisoners from the Revolutionary War, right? But see, there's a reason why they just said that the practice was most widespread in the 18th and 19th century, so the 17 and 1800s in Britain, right? Which include America, because as a result of the Poor Laws and as a result of what's called the Black Acts of white people from England were being shipped over at such a high rate to America that they ran out of space to put them. Okay? Now, as we read through history, they don't like to, even though they were the slaves, they don't like to say that. They like to say that these were indentured servants. Okay? But see, once we start knowing our history, we start finding out that the indentured servants are the slaves. Indentured servitude is slavery, right? But see, they don't say that because they don't want to tell you that they was the slaves, even though they were the slaves. They were the being a prisoner is being a slave. Being a prisoner is being a slave. Okay? So if we look a little deeper into this, we look at what some of these prison ships actually look like. Okay? Then we start finding out that not only are there prison ships, and these are the prison ships. There's lots of pictures of them. They had chapels inside of them. But they were abandoned ships. Ships that just didn't work anymore. Some of them were converted into hospitals. These are all abandoned ships that just sat out there and they couldn't sail. So we didn't have to worry about the prisoners getting away. They just sit out there and house the prisoners. This one right here, the Jersey prison ship. We've heard of New Jersey because that's where it was. All right. So these prison ships, this is where they housed the different prisoners. And how do we know these are white people, so-called white people, who are in these? Because see, as we look at all the pictures, right, of all the people who are on the prison ships, we don't see any so-called black people. We just see so-called white people. And then we can even understand this even further, because see, what they'll do is they like to tell you that these are martyrs, prison ship martyrs. Okay. So they want to tell you that the prisoners were martyrs, and not only that, they build monuments. And all these monuments are right here in America. They've built all these monuments right here in America. These giant monuments and parks and plaques and all of these different museums all over for prisoners. Now, we're supposed to not think of prisoners in a very good light. So when have you ever seen anybody making a museum in a monument for prisoners? Well, let's just see what they have to say. This impressive monument, consisting of a 100-foot wide granite staircase and a central Doric column 149 feet in height, was designed by renowned architect Stanford White, 1853 to 1906, and marks the site of a crypt for some of the remains of the estimated 11,500 men and women known as the prison ship martyrs. So they're giving it away right there. They're saying that there's men and women, and we know that women are just now getting to be able to fight in wars. So back in the 1700s, they weren't fighting in wars. So why would they say women are in prison because these were prisoners. These were prisoners from Great Britain is the reason why. In 1776, American Major General Nathaniel Greene supervised the construction of Fort Putnam on high ground that is now part of this park. During the Battle of Long Island, the Continental Army surrendered the fort and retreated to Manhattan. The British held thousands of captains on prison ships anchored in Wallabout Bay. Over 11,500 men and women died of overcrowding, contaminated water, starvation, and disease aboard the ships, and their bodies were hastily buried along the shore. These brave patriots represented all 13 colonies and at least 13 different nationalities. In 1808, the remains of the prison ship martyrs were buried in a tomb on Jackson Street, which Jackson is a very important name. We'll get into maybe in a little bit. Now Hudson Avenue, near the Brooklyn Navy Yard. More fraction of total volume of remains were entered into the vault. Towards the end of the 19th century, a diverse group of interests, including the federal government, municipal and state governments, private societies, and donors, began a campaign for a permanent monument to the prison ship martyrs. In 1905, the renowned architectural firm of McKinn, Mead, and White was hired to design a new entrance to the crypt and a wide granite stairway leading to the plaza on top of the hill. From its center rose a freestanding Doric column crowned by a bronze lantern. President-elect William Howard Taft attended the monument's dedication in 1908. So the president of the time is even going to attend this building of this monument. Sculptor Adolf Alexander Wyman, 1870 to 1952, created the monument's bronze pieces, the large urn for decorative lantern, never functioning, as well as 4 eagles that were mounted to the corner granite posts. Now, remember that eagles is the symbol of so-called white people. That's the reason why they put those 4 eagles there. Okay, and that's the reason why the symbol of what they call at the time, and what the Dred Scott case even calls the white man. Like, they make sure that everybody knows that this is the white man's constitution, is represented by the eagle. In the 1960s, the eagles were removed to storage after being repeatedly vandalized. A tablet over the entrance to tomb, also temporarily removed, was donated by the Tammany Society and was originally the cornerstone of the Navy Yard vault. An elevator and stairs for this interior were installed in 1937. Both were removed in 1948 after the monument was renovated by New York City Parks. In 1970, the elevator and stairs were removed. In 2008, 100 years after its original dedication, the Prison Ship Martyrs Monument was unveiled after a full restoration. Okay, so not that long ago. It addressed not only the monument, but also the surrounding plaza and the Martyrs Crypt located at the center of the grand staircase. The project consisted of cleaning and repairing the column and plinth, and the tablet and bronze eagles were restored. 2 original eagles and 2 replicas have been reinstalled at the bases of 4 fluted shafts at the corners of the plaza. 2 remaining originals are on the view in the Arsenal and Central Park. The lawn that surrounded the monument was paved with granite pavers that were part of White's original design, but not built. New architectural lighting was also added to illuminate the plaza and monument at night, highlighting the monument's majestic splendor for another century. Okay, so they're going through an awful lot. Presidents, the federal government, and all of these people for a prison ship monument that they say these are martyrs. right, for the Revolutionary War, but how could they really just be martyrs for the Revolutionary War, which we could, if that's the case, we could say the people locked up in prison right now are martyrs, depending on whose side you're on. Okay, so it says men and women were locked up. And we know that women were not fighting in any wars. So these can't be soldiers who are prisoners of war, because it says men and women. And when we start digging into this history a little more and find out who was getting locked up and why Britain, which was America, see, when you say Britain, you're saying America. It's just, where are we talking about at this time? Okay, because according to their records in 1776, this is when America got their freedom from Great Britain. Okay, all right. So why would they go through all of this to celebrate prisoners? Well, how come the prisoners are getting a monument? Since when do we celebrate prisoners? And we know that they're not war prisoners, because again, women weren't fighting in the wars. Now, we also have museums. See? And then if we look at this museum picture right here. If we look real close, we'll see there's a black guy in the background hanging on the wall. Okay? And then we'll see the people, some other guys, some white guys. Okay? All kinds of different flags from all those different nationalities of people who were locked up. Then it says liberty up there on top. Okay. So here's some more pictures of the different monuments that they've made. And you can see that these are like super extravagant monuments that they're making. And these are for prisoners. They said the martyrs. Okay, so what were they dying for? Okay, let's look a little bit more into this. They were living on the prison ships, and this is here in America. Okay, all right. The terminology hulk comes from the Royal Navy, meaning a ship incapable of full service, either through damage from initial non-completion. In England, in 1776, during the reign of King George III, due to a shortage of prison space in London, the concept of prison hulks moored in the Thames was introduced to meet the need for prison space. The first such ship came into use July 15, 1776, under the command of Mr. Duncan, and was moored at Barking Creek with prisoners doing hard labor on the shore during daylight hours. Okay, so now they're saying that this was a British thing, and the first ship was in 1776. But see how we just get contradictory information? Because we just finished reading on a granite slab that these weren't 1776. It was saying they already had 11,500 men and women in here. And this wasn't anything that had to do with prisoners. These were martyrs. See, so their stories aren't connecting between Wikipedia here and the actual granite slabs that they made as monuments for the prison martyrs. Okay, story's not connected. So as we can see, all these monuments and parks, they're in New York, they're in North Carolina. We see this in New Jersey. Just in all these different places, we're seeing all these different ships. They're right here in America. And what was happening at the time? England was sending all of its prisoners right here to America. So let's see what some other people have to say about what these prison ships are. Okay, let's see what they have to say. We've got another little article here talking about the prison ship martyrs. On a small triangular piece of ground on Hudson Avenue, Brooklyn, right against the blank Navy Yard wall, has stood for years a dilapidated structure in which were deposited the remains of the patriots who had perished in the British prison ships during the Revolutionary War. Okay, so again, what does Wikipedia say about it? It says that the hulk, the terminology hulk, comes from the Royal Navy, meaning a ship incapable of full service either through damage or from initial non-completion. In England in 1776, during the reign of King George, due to a shortage of prison space in London, the concept of prison hulks moored in the Thames was introduced to meet the need for prison space. See, they're not talking about war heroes. They're talking about prisoners. Okay? Talking about prisoners. So let's just keep going on about what this article says. The history of this old structure is interesting. Early in the Revolutionary War, the British 64 gunship Jersey was dismantled and moored in Wallabout Bay, where she was used as a prison ship until the close of the war, when she was left to decay. Often as many as 1,000 prisoners were simultaneously confined on the Jersey. Her crew was composed of drafted British and Hessian soldiers who were very cruel to the prisoners. Here, confined within a stone's throw of their friends and relatives, these poor surviving prisoners gazed from their prison portholes on the neighboring shores, where welcome and plenty awaited them if they could but escape. They had but to promise obedience to the crown, and they were free. Promises of pardon and of gold were made them if they would but submit to good King George. But they sadly shook their heads. Then right, said the British officers. The mortality among these brave and steadfast men was terrible. As fast as they died, they were taken ashore and buried in the swampy land forming the shore of the bay. They then lay until 1808, when Tammany Society took the matter in hand, gathered the remains together, and erected a monument in honor of the heroic men. On the 26th of May of that year, a grand procession was formed, and amidst solemn ceremonials, the bones were placed in a vault which had been prepared. For those days, the procession was an immense one, and the display something gorgeous and unprecedented. The remains had been placed in 11 immense coffins, each coffin intended to hold the relics of the natives of one state, and these were deposited inside the building after orations, music, and the firing of salutes. The accounts of ceremonial traversing all parts of the Union created great excitement, and for a while there was no doubt that a fitting monument would take the place of the structure in which these relics deposited. Benjamin Romaine was appointed treasurer of the fund, but this never reached any considerable size and was before long spent in keeping the place in repair. A sum appropriated by the state toward a monument was returned to the state treasury. Soon the vault and its content were almost forgotten, and in altering the grade of Jackson Street, the walls of the vault were disturbed. The land on which the vault was situated was in course of time sold for taxes and purchased by Benjamin Romaine, who had himself been a prisoner of the British and who took every possible care of the bones during his life, and whose death was entered in the same tomb, which was subsequent, and it continues. But we can see a picture of it, right? This is in Washington Park, Brooklyn, right? And it says the British prison ship Martyrs. Okay. Now we just found out that these are men and women, right? So we've already gone over that. And these are people who just had to say, so they're martyrs because it says they had to promise obedience to the crown and they were free. Promises of pardon and gold were made to them. So they would get money, they would get gold, they would get pardoned, they would get freed. But they had to be promised to submit to good King George. And they shook their heads. And then the British officers told them to rot and just sit there then. So that was their punishment for starting to fight back against the British king. Okay. That was their punishment. So as we go through these, see exactly what these British ships looked like, which were here in America. They say they're British ships, but they're all here in America because all of the prisoners got sent to America. All of the prisoners got sent to America. America was the home of the prisoners. So, when have we ever seen people celebrate prisoners? So the American government celebrates prisoners, right? But they only celebrate prisoners when they're fighting against what they call a rogue government. We look at this right here, site of Gill Street, Compton, demolished. Right? They demolished the prisons. Okay, this is where they used to be locked up. And the prison hulks were again the vessels of common form of interment in Britain and elsewhere in the 18th and 19th century. Charles F. Campbell writes about 40 ships of the Royal Navy were converted for use as prison hulks. Other hulks included HMS Warrior, which became a prison ship at Woolwich in February 1840. One was established at Gibraltar, others in Bermuda, at Antigua, off Brooklyn, and Wallabout Bay, and Shermes. Other hulks were anchored off Woolwich, Portsmouth, Chapman, Deptford, and Plymouth Dock, Devonport. This is in America. Okay. So these British ships were here in America, and they were locking up prisoners who were getting shipped to America. These were criminal prisoners. Okay. It says right here, the first British prison ship, it says used to accommodate criminal prisoners. The first British use of a prison ship was privately owned. Taylor engaged by the Home Office in 1775 via contract with her owner, Duncan Campbell. Taylor was moored in the Thames with the intention that she be the receiving point for all inmates whose sentences of transportation to the Americas had been delayed by the American Rebellion. Prisoners began arriving from January 1776. For most, their incarceration was brief, as the Home Office had also offered pardons for any transport who joined the Army or Navy or chose to voluntarily leave the British Isles for the duration of their sentence. By December 1776, all prisoners aboard Taylor had been pardoned, enlisted, or died, and the contracts ceased. Okay, so these aren't just people, because like I said, it doesn't make any sense what they're saying about these being martyrs, like they're saying it is. Okay, and these didn't just stop. These didn't stop being prison ships. That's another problem with their story, talking about how the prison ships, they're trying to make this like these prison ships were just for 1776. They were for the Revolutionary War, and then after the Revolutionary War, that was the end of the prison ships. But no, that was not the end of the prison ships. Okay, that was not the end of the prison ships. They kept having prison ships up until the mid 1800s. And we know that because we can look at the pictures of the prison ships, and they tell you the different years that they were commissioned. So we've got a prison ship. We've got prison ships right here long after the Revolutionary War. Right? This is long after the Revolutionary War. And they're still talking about there's prison ships. Another prison ship from 1865. Right? And they're saying how the ship was used. It's 1860s. Here's another part of the monument. And you can see that they have the lion here. What does that lion represent? Because that lion was part of the actual prison ship. Okay. The lion was part of it. It was part of the brazier on the prison ship. Because the lion represents Britain. And what we don't know is that Britain, the crown of Britain, were so-called black people. See, that's what we don't know. White people were getting their freedom, and that's why they call these martyrs. That's why they're calling them martyrs. They're calling the prison ship martyrs because the prisoners martyrs, and they're building all these monuments for the prison ship prisoners, right? When does America like prisoners? America ain't never liked no prisoners. Oh, but it makes sense that America would all of a sudden love some prisoners when they're the prisoners who set themselves, what they like to say, they didn't say they got their freedom. They said they set themselves at liberty, right? When they got their liberty, it's the Statue of Liberty, right? See, that's the part that they play games with. See, and that's why they're calling them martyrs. And that's why they're building monuments for these prisoners. Because these are the same prisoners who broke themselves free from jail and then locked up the black people who put them there. And that's what nobody knows. It wasn't white people. It wasn't black people who were the black people were sending white people to America as prisoners. That's what the colonies were. They were prisons. America was founded as a prison. This is why white people love locking us up. Because they're just getting revenge. They're getting revenge on the people who used to lock them up. The entire city of New York was a giant, it was 5 different jails. A borough is a gigantic prison. They ran out of room and they built ships, the hulks. They called them hulks. And they built these because they ran out of room. They said, look, you can get out. You got to be loyal to Britain. They didn't want to do that. They said, we don't care. We're ganging up and all the prisoners united. And then they end up getting their freedom. That's a whole nother video within itself. But this is just letting you know where it all kind of stems from. Because they were sending these prisoners over starting in 1580 is when they started sending them over. It's when they started sending them over. See, this was your real transatlantic trade, slave trade. See, this eagle, this is their symbol, the eagle. This lion, see this lion? That's the symbol of, that's the symbol of so-called black people, the lion. Okay? You don't see any so-called, see, this is a good picture of where they started burning down their houses of corrections and fighting back, right? And escaping and gaining their liberty, right? Where were they gaining their liberty from? They were gaining their liberty from jail because they got brought over as prisoners, right? Why? Because they were the prisoners who got shipped to America as slaves, and they called themselves slaves because they had to work for free. Just like what prisoners do today, work for free, right? That's what the 13th Amendment is all about. Okay? So if we go and check out the 13th Amendment, what was the purpose of the whole 13th Amendment? What did the 13th Amendment really do? Section 1 of the 13th Amendment says, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction. See? So once they got in charge, they said, you can't, we're not doing that no more. The only way you have to do servitude, involuntary servitude, is as a punishment for a crime. And then they came out with Jim Crow, and they start locking black people up wholesale. Why? Because they getting revenge for them. That's how that was the whole reason they got shipped to America in the first place. All this whitewash history, this a whole bunch of big lies. It's a whole bunch of big lies. They are not making monuments of this size where presidents are coming to open the monument for the prisoners, who included men and women. These were not men and women at war. We already read some of the articles saying exactly who it was. We know who it was. These were criminals. These were criminals who were getting shipped over as a result of the Elizabethan Poor Laws. And they got transported. Let's look up the Elizabethan Poor Laws real quick, and then we're going to bring this to a close. There was some Victorian Poor Laws as well. But the Elizabethan Poor Laws of 1601, like it says here in Wikipedia, the Poor Relief Act of 1601 was an act of the Parliament of England. The Act for Relief of the Poor, 1601, popularly known as the Elizabethan Poor Law, 43rd Elizabeth, or the Old Poor Law, was passed in 1601 and created a poor law system for England and Wales. It formalized early practices of poor relief distribution in England and Wales, and is generally considered a refinement of the Act of the Relief of the Poor, 1597, that established overseers of the poor. The Old Poor Law was not one law, but a collection of laws passed between the 16th and 18th century. The system administrative unit was the parish. It was not a centralized government policy, but a law made individual parishes responsible for poor law legislation. The 1601 Act saw a move away from the more obvious forms of punishing paupers under the Tudor system towards methods of correction. And what were these methods of correction? Transportation. Transportation to where? America. Okay? So the main points of the act were people who couldn't work because they had a problem, they were able to get licensed. Okay? They were able to go get a license and they could beg. But if you didn't have your license, you couldn't beg. And what did you have to do if you didn't have a license? You had to go to jail in the house of correction. And they didn't just put you in jail how you sit, and they put you in jail to have you learn a trade. After you learn that trade, that's when, after your 7 years was up, that's where the master's degree comes from. That's why it takes 7 years to get. It's from the same thing. Okay, so if we look up the Transportation Act, right? Transportation Act of 1717. They call it the Piracy Act, but let's see what it says. The Piracy Act of 1717, sometimes called the Transportation Act of 1717, was an act of the Parliament of Great Britain that established a regulated bonded system to transport criminals to colonies in North America for indentured service as a punishment for those convicted or attainted in Great Britain, excluding Scotland. The act established a 7-year transportation sentence as a punishment for people convicted of lesser felonies, those under the benefit of clergy, and a 14-year sentence for more serious crimes in lieu of capital punishment. Completion of the sentence had the effect of a pardon. The punishment for returning before completion was death. It is commonly accepted that 30,000 convicts may have been transported to the British colonies, with some estimates going as high as 50,000. Oh, but no, there were much more people. See, the people were coming from the British Act, from the Poor Laws, starting in 1580. That's when this whole thing started with Queen Elizabeth. And this Piracy Act, when you actually read the entire act, which we don't have time to do, this made it to where the pirates actually got an exclusive contract to bring the prisoners over, right? Because the pirates are the British. The pirates are the British Navy. These are the black pirates of the Caribbean. This is the British Navy we're talking about, right? And who's their arch enemy? The prisoners. And who were the prisoners? The people who got sent to America. This is what the Revolutionary War was all about. It was about white people getting their freedom from the black English crown. Now let's look at Monkey Anna. Let's look at Monkey Anna. What's this say? Am I not a man and a brother? Who does it look like? This comes from the book Monkey Anna. It's from Great Britain, right? Where they're talking about black people, right? We know that. They made that slave saying, am I not a man and a brother? That's famous from that, right? Let's see if we can find the queen. How they show the Queen of England, Anna, the last Stuart queen. But here she is. See, they show Monkey Anna looking like a monkey, the Queen of England. They're depicting her as a monkey, right? Just like they're depicting, right? Here's, am I not a man or a brother, right? Here's that. right? The black slave that they love to show us, and then they show in Monkeyana the same thing, but they show him as an ape, right? And then they show the Queen of England as an ape. Now, who are they talking about? They're talking about black people. So how can't you figure out, just add up 1 and 1 and make 2 to figure out that all throughout this Monkeyana book, they're talking about the black Europeans who were sending. They're showing the black Europeans as devils. They're showing a mask on the ground. Why would they show a mask on the ground? Because they're masquerading like they're the the crown. They're not the crown. Black people were the crown. Black people were the crown. Now I go all the way into this throughout the book, Lost Along the Way. I mean, I really get into the details of this. I can't get into all of the details of this here because it's just way too much. It's way too much. But all of this, Monkeyana, the Queen, them showing you that all these British politicians and as monkeys, we already know who they consider monkeys. We know. We know who they call monkeys. That's not a secret. And they showing you the Queen of England standing next to the guy who wrote Thomas Paine, the one who wrote the Declaration of Independence, standing right next to the Queen of England, or a monkey with the queen's crown on her head, holding the scepter like that's the queen. So who do you think they were getting their freedom from? And then they're making monuments for the prisoners. When do Americans make monuments for prisoners? Oh, because we're talking about the white prisoners who broke themselves free from the prison in 1830, got their freedom July 4th, 1830, right? Because they got some of their freedom from what they like to call Monkeyana and King George. They got some of that freedom from them starting in 1776. But they didn't get their freedom from so-called they didn't get their freedom from so-called black people altogether. And that's what the War of 1812 was about. That's what it was secretly about. And then that's what the war in 1830 in New Orleans was secretly about, right? But these things are really hidden in its deep history. Black people were not the slaves during slavery. White people were. White people were the slaves during slavery. White people got their freedom at the end of the Civil War. And then they started going crazy on us, starting in the 1890s and on later. That's when they started going crazy on us, right? So anyway, this is the real reason. These are the real reasons that they like to lock up black people. These are the real reasons. See, we talk about colonialism, but we don't really know what colonialism really is. Colonialism is white people being sent to America, put into a colony. And what is the colony? A company that's a prison company that's putting the people to work. That's what these were. That's why it said they in the little plaque in their granite stone that there were people representing all the colonies, because these were all prisoners representing the colonies, and these are their martyrs. They call them martyrs. They was prisoners. They was getting locked up. I think we was the black slaves from Africa when we was the actual slave master from Great Britain who was sending white people to America as the prisoners. The black judges were sending them. And then we wonder why white people love to lock us up. And they love to just have so much fun with us and kill us and shoot us. We don't know why. And this is the reason why. And it's so much of a deeper story than I'm getting into right now. I mean, I just don't have time to really get into it. But again, I wrote a whole book about it. I wrote a book. It's called Lost Along the Way. Go to lostalongtheway.org and learn your true identity. It's a 30-hour long video book. It's that long because it has to be that long. Take an hour or two a day. Read it. Watch it. Find out who you are, so-called black people. You are so much more than they tell you you are. You're so much more than they tell you you are. There's a quote, and I'm going to just leave it here, by W. Somerset Maugham, which is a writer. And the quote says, "The fact that a great many people believe something is no guarantee of its truth. The fact that a very great many of people believe in something is no guarantee of its truth." So just because everybody thinks we slaves from Africa, don't mean it's true. Just because everybody thinks the almighty white man came and conquered and came to America as the great conqueror and brought 20 million black people up, that don't mean it's true. Because it's not. It's just a big lie. It's a big lie. It's a big lie. It's time to find out the truth about who so-called black people really are. It's time to show the truth about who so-called white people really are. Peace and love.
This is a dangerous groups that we're dealing with now.